USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Monday, November 7th, 2022. Each week we look back at the highlights of the weekend and the news of the week. This podcast is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Find out today by visiting dcu.org. Membership required. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. Well, Jim, we talked about this in our USCHO Edge podcast, and we kind of look forward to it last week. Penn State and Michigan, the series really did live up to expectations. Penn State, 3-0 win on Friday. That was a real surprise. They lost in overtime on Saturday. What does this do for Penn State? You know, Penn State has gotten criticism, and we even addressed that on Wednesday with Guy Godowski, criticism about an easy non-conference schedule, but they did a terrific job against Michigan.
You know, and Guy Godowski even said the criticism was fair because their schedule was light. Well, listen, last weekend was not light. That's a good Michigan team. They dominated them on Friday. Shots were 49-17. That's a lot of shots. That means territorial control. I saw a little bit of that game. I mean, they really did have that control. 3-0 win, that, you know, maybe legitimizes you a little bit. You fall behind that same 3-0 on Saturday. And then in 5 minutes, you score 3 goals in the third period, force the overtime. You don't end up winning, but you still get 4 out of 6 points against what is supposed to be the best team in college hockey. Penn State's now 9-1 with that one loss being an overtime loss to Michigan. I think you just legitimize Penn State right there. They deserve every ounce of recognition they're going to get in polls and rankings and all that sort of stuff this week.
Well, I had an active interest in the game. Noah West, our goalie that played here our last year, got his first career start at Michigan. Found out later that Portillo was sick, so he played both games. All accounts, I DVR'd the game to see how Noah played, but I was out recruiting. But he made 47 saves. An empty netter was the other one. Can't ask for anything more goaltending wise. And then to have a 3-0 lead slip away, but to find a way to bounce back shows a little bit about Michigan's character too. Penn State, we all know, shots. So 49 is not something where you go, whoa, that's what they do. They throw the puck on goal from anywhere. You always talk to your defenseman about being aware off the back post of people coming in, because there's going to be pucks from the corner on the net. There's going to be rebounds. And you talk to your goalies about being ready for every shot. So when you go, oh my God, 49 shots, that's not something that's out of the realm of reality for Penn State. Good for Michigan to bounce back with 2 points, finding a way to get that point after blowing the lead, because that is hard. But I think you hit the nail on the head. The criticism of the schedule, it is what it is. They've always said you can only play the schedule you're dealt, but they dealt the schedule for themselves. They made the non-conference schedule. So they knew what they had, and maybe it was by design. Maybe it was to, as a coach, get a whole bunch of confidence and wins under your belt heading into Big Ten play where it isn't as easy.
Yeah, I do want to highlight, yes, shots are going to come when you have Penn State. I think I said on one of our podcasts last week that Penn State shoots from the popcorn stand. That's the way I've always felt. But go to the converse side of that. They allowed Michigan over 2 nights just 44 shots on goal. That shows that their defense is out there to play some good hockey and shut down teams. So I look at Friday. They were really able to shut down that Michigan team. I think that the Wolverines probably had a little bit of shock in their eyes when they had to come out and really get dominated from the opening faceoff all the way through that game. I feel like that, what does it mean? We'll see more this weekend when Penn State has to face Minnesota for 2. And, when you have to put 4 games together like that, I think we had said it last week, Ed, you're going to learn a lot about your team. And Guy Godowski probably has learned a little bit this past weekend, and they should feel confident as they get to play Minnesota this upcoming weekend going into that series.
But on the other side of that, Jimmy, usually when you play in their mind, an unproven goaltender, usually the team comes out and it's a jolt. You're really, really good defensively. So I think you talked about Penn State there. Michigan was kind of loose for having a goalie with his first career starts. Ed, how many times have you seen it when I think RIT one year had to use a club goalie for a little bit and they gave up 8 shots on goal? I mean, that's Michigan being surprised. That somewhat surprises me a little bit because it's historically in hockey, you block every shot. You're in the way of everything. And that's to give up 49. We know they shoot.
And 84 on the weekend. That's a lot of shots for that goalie to face in his collegiate debut, or I'm sorry, his debut at Michigan.
Yeah, he won a lot of games for me, so it's not a collegiate debut, but that's how many times we've just seen that a lot, and to give up 84 shots when you got a unproven goalie in your mind, his first start at Michigan, just to continue that, to give up shots. That's surprising too.
Well, heck, Minnesota State had Dryden McKay for 4 years and most of the time kept it under 20 shots that he faced.
Oh my God. Are you back on Dryden McKay again? I still think you guys owe me money for when you said Dryden McKay would play in the NHL. I think he's in the East Coast League. I'll take the money now. And then if he ends up playing I'll give it back to you.
Well, with Petrozelli going up to the NHL, you may see McKay go to the Marlies. So who knows? Anyway, but Penn State, I think, is going to get some pretty good recognition in the poll that comes out today, as will UConn. Now, do they fit into the national argument? They swept Maine. UConn's now 9-1-1. They've had a difficult enough Hockey East schedule and non-conference schedule so far. What about the Huskies?
I'll leave this to Jimmy. I've got one word on that one. Yes. I don't think you can say anything, but they've had a hard schedule. They've done well. Yes, they are legitimately right now, I believe, a top 5 team in the nation.
Yeah, I will admit, I know last week they got their first place vote in the USCHO. Well, I had them number 1 on my ballot this week. And I think deservedly so. They're winning games. They're winning what's in front of them and finding ways to win in styles that are difficult. Falling behind, rallying, finding a goal in overtime when you need it. I mean, they're doing everything to prove that they're not just a fluke team and that they, can chase games and win it. That no coach wants to chase a game, but if you can prove that you can chase a game and win it, I think that shows a lot about the character, the heart of this team. They don't want to lose right now, and they're not. I'm very, very, very impressed with what UConn has done out of the gate. I still haven't seen them in person. I've called a lot of games in Hockey East, various teams this year. I haven't had a UConn game. I'm not even sure. I can't even remember when I'm going to see them for the first time this season, but I'm dying to. They're a fun team that seems to get up and down the ice really, really well. I want to see this team continue to succeed. It's a good story for Hockey East. It's a good story for college hockey to have kind of a newcomer that suddenly, I kind of remember. And it's funny, it's not, you're going to stay in the same state here, but I remember when Quinnipiac had so many good seasons here and there, and then all of a sudden they burst out to start a season and they finally got to that number 1 ranking, what that meant to that Quinnipiac team. And I don't think that they got to the Frozen Four that year, but it was only a couple of years later they ended up in a Frozen Four. It's amazing what finally getting over humps can do for teams. And the most important thing, and Derek, you can attest to this as a coach, is that when you lose players, you reload. You don't have to rebuild. You can actually reload. And I think that is what UConn did this season. I would expect that to potentially happen for years to come.
And that's the R word, reload, rebuild, the 2 R words. And you want to be consistent with your program. And we'll see if they're able to. They had a good year last year, just on the cusp. They've taken it to another level. Let's see how it consistently over time, like you mentioned, Quinnipiac. I will say you just cued all the mean tweets, the trolls, the emails, everything by admitting as a Hockey East mark that you gave Hockey East UConn a number one vote. So be prepared to block some people.
I have no problem, to be honest with you. I think when a team deserves it, they deserve it. Right now, I think that I had a hard time looking at number one on my ballot this weekend. And I'm just going to pull up my ballot so I can make sure I reference it all perfectly. But, I ended up with Connecticut, Penn State, and Minnesota in that order, 1, 2, and 3, and dropped Michigan down to 4 because despite the win on Saturday, I'm still not that impressed with everything that they've done. Despite being 8 and 2,
Where are you at with St. Cloud?
St. Cloud's right there. They were 5 on my ballot.
8 and 2, and they've played a pretty challenging schedule.
They have. No, you make a point there, but I just want to, I know that voters all vote a different way. And usually as I sit down on a Sunday night, I'm looking at what you've done this season, but what you particularly did this past weekend. So a loss for St. Cloud, a split in a weekend series, despite the fact that it was against Denver, I still tend to, just take it down a peg because of that. That's my philosophy. I think everybody has a different voting philosophy, but the most recent weekend always does seem to take a little precedence in my mind.
Oh, dare we bring up the P word though? Because we will later.
Let's wait on that.
Yeah, we're going to bring that up actually in just a moment. Let's talk about Minnesota, though. They swept Notre Dame, got 6 Big Ten points out of that. Where do they fit in the national picture? I can tell you right now, they're going to be number 1 in this week's poll. They're going to be one of 6 teams that get first place votes, but they're going to run away with it. Is this a good place for Minnesota? Is this something that you can make a good case for?
Yeah, well, I was in Minnesota recruiting. I saw Bob Motzko on Sunday, and he said they're in a pretty good spot right now. Obviously the emotion of the North Dakota weekend. They've done a good job to start in the Big Ten. Obviously, Notre Dame's tight defensively, tight checking, but right now not a lot of offense. So you look at that series and go, Minnesota did what they needed to do. It's challenging. The Big Ten every week is going to be a challenge, but they found a way to get 6 points at home. And that's the biggest thing as you move forward. And like you said, right now, number 1 team in the nation.
I totally agree with what you said there, Derek. They're doing a lot of things right. This was a weird series for them because that goals were going to be hard to come by. But Notre Dame's offense really did not find ways to show up this weekend. And that's an issue. And I think that's something that Jeff Jackson is going to have to address with this team. I believe they play Michigan this weekend. This is not, the Big Ten. We've said it almost since week 1. They've had such success out of conference. That means inside your own conference, it's going to be a real grind. And if you're going from one weekend to another, there's not going to be a lot of weekends off. I even look at, I know I didn't even put them in the rundown, but the ability for Michigan State to outscore Wisconsin 10-1 this weekend. Michigan State is suddenly showing some signs of brilliance. So, which is, what are the bottom tier teams in the Big Ten? It's hard to find them right now. I think Wisconsin definitively is a bottom tier team. Maybe it is the bottom of the Big Ten. I think Todd Milewski, our executive editor emeritus, posted that this is the worst start in conference play for Wisconsin team in the history of conferences since they've been in an actual conference. So that's kind of telling, but I don't see many easy games in the Big Ten this year. So every weekend is going to be that slog. It's going to be hard to show up for.
You brought up Wisconsin there, and Todd brought it up. I think they got Long Island and then Lindenwood. They need to make some hay in their record. I mean, if these are the 4 games that they need to go 4-0. And it's weird because I know we're going to talk more about it, but there was a lot of history this weekend with that Wisconsin number that Todd threw up, but also what's it been 25 years since Merrimack swept Boston College?
Right.
So there's a lot of things that the dynamic is changing a little bit amongst the blue bloods and the teams that are the chasers, I guess. The tide's turning. You're talking about, Wisconsin being not as down. You're also talking about Merrimack up over a Boston College. You're talking about a UConn with the number one vote. I mean, 15 years ago, this is really something that you go, yeah, no way. But you also are talking about the blue bloods of the Big Ten, and the NCHC still within that mix.
You don't have to go back too far in Hockey East history to remember that every championship weekend was Boston College, Boston University, Maine, and New Hampshire at the TD Garden or the Boston Garden or whatever it was back then. It's been 20 different names in that period. And the teams that absolutely never made it were Northeastern. It was UConn wasn't even in the league. Merrimack, forget it, never there. UMass, they're kind of down the bottom of the standings right now. But it's just they've only played 4 games in Hockey East and have had a lot of overtime games that haven't given them enough points. But to see teams like Northeastern, UConn, UMass Lowell, Providence, and Merrimack, that's the top 5 teams in Hockey East standings wise right now. Somebody from 15 years ago, if somebody knocked them out and they woke up today, they'd be like, oh, no. Somebody put the standings upside down in Hockey East because those teams, BC, BU, Maine, UNH, they make up 4 of the 6 lowest teams right now in Hockey East.
Well, and you mentioned Wisconsin having to deal with Lindenwood and LIU. Lindenwood just swept Army at Army 5-3 both nights and putting up over 40 shots the first night, nearly that many on the second night. They're not going to be a walk in the park for a team that doesn't seem very confident.
They're 4-8 right now. I mean, what would have been the over/under on Lindenwood with their schedule? We talked about them in the Atlantic hockey portion of their schedule, and that was Bentley, AIC, Air Force, and now Army. So they're doing pretty well, but their schedule is going to get a little bit harder as they move along here.
I am kind of impressed. I understood when Penn State came out of the gate and played pretty well. They were like 3 years in when they started to show that they could be a dominant team. I was impressed when Arizona State started and played well and played teams tough. But this is a first-year program that does not have the budget that Penn State nor Arizona State had when they started. And I'm really impressed with what they've done. Same thing for St. Thomas, and even LIU has been a tough game over the last 2 seasons for every team. These teams, they're utilizing the transfer portal very well, and they're finding ways to build tradition and build teams quickly. None of these new teams entered, despite the fact that they're not the $100 million budget type of teams. They're still finding ways to win games. And it takes good coaching. It takes good structure. They're finding structure early. I think that's really important.
39th in the PairWise. There it is.
Oh, you used the word.
There it is.
You used the word.
There it is. I used it.
All right. So, Jim, you brought up the point in our notes that right now Minnesota's 8th in the PairWise. Is it too early to use the P word? Well, it's too early to say, well, we're number this or we're number that. It's not too early to look at what's going into the components that will put it together. But to give you an example, before the weekend, Harvard at 2-0 was first. They play 2 ECAC games. They're 13th this morning. Those things bounce around. So, but since the PairWise has been pared down to fewer components, you really need to look at the RPI. It pretty much tracks that. And the RPI is 3/4 your opponents and their opponents. So your schedule has a lot to do with it. As the teams go into more league play, their league records are going to converge. The league record will converge more towards 500. And what you're going to find is things will start banding in the areas of the non-conference wins for each league. And so you'll see the best teams in the best leagues float to the top, and the best teams in the lower leagues have trouble getting into the top 16. That's what's going to happen. Right now, where people are doesn't make that much of a difference. There's very little conference play that's gotten underway for some teams. So, yeah, look at what feeds into where teams are, but don't look at the absolute ordinal number of where they are.
Yeah, I think until every team has played a minimum of 12 games. And that's really, let's go to the Ivies. The Ivies won't get these 12 games in until probably after Christmas. That's when you can seriously start taking looks at the PairWise. And I think coaches know that too. We as USCHO at one point didn't even publish it until mid-January, late January. And then you realize that there was demand and traffic and people were actually looking at it earlier in the season. So we started, putting it up really from day one, but there's nothing you can take. There's no stock you can take out of the PairWise right now.
Yeah. And that's the case. It's fun to joke about and say, but we all, Atlantic hockey's got 3 in the top 30, which is really good, but they also got 4 in the bottom 10. And I think when they start playing each other and start beating each other, and I mean, that's where you're going to see some people dropping and changing, some big drops and maybe some even big gains a little bit.
We talked about the interconference percentage for Atlantic hockey and wanting to get to 400 or above. As we record this on Monday, the 7th, they're 347 out of conference. ECAC is 409 and CCHA is 419. So the league is getting closer, and there's still some non-conference games to be played. RIT, for example, has 6 more non-conference games on the schedule.
Yeah, and they're good. They're doing a good job right now, and they've picked it up. It's hard to say that in October they've completely eliminated themselves from a second team in the NCAA tournament, but by their way that they've taken a little step lately, they're still, as they said in Dump, there's still a little bit of a chance. You're saying there's a chance, and they got to win games. That's what it comes down to. And those games against Lindenwood don't help. The losses, those are the non-conference independent losses, but they're going to need to put some wins together. But right now, and we might as well hit it right now while you're here, there's a little separation in the Atlantic hockey top. You've got RIT, Sacred Heart, and Niagara. And yes, they played a few more games than some of them, but there's a big difference in the points. And AIC has been up and down obviously by the sweep of getting swept by RIT this weekend. But yes, is AIC done and gone? No, but you got to be impressed with what RIT's done, what Sacred Heart's done, and what Niagara's done so far within league play. And will they be able to sustain it? Once again, that's where the bottom, if they start beating them, that's where they start dropping a little bit.
Yep. And we're going to get back to that in a little more detail later in the podcast. But right now we're going to take a pause and come back with more. USCHO Weekend Review is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org.
Sometimes it's not about wanting a new car, it's about needing one. And I needed one I could rely on. So I got an auto loan with DCU. They offer the same low rates on both new and used cars, and I was able to borrow a little extra to make a used car as good as new. My auto loan from DCU means a ride I can finally rely on, which feels like a pretty big thing. What will DCU mean to you? Insured by NCUA. Membership required. Visit dcu.org.
Welcome back to USCHO Weekend Review. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. Providence, how about their weekend? I went out on a flyer and figured they would be the winner on Friday in our USCHO Edge Pick'em. They won 7-4 at home and came back from a 3-1 deficit to win 4-3 in overtime at UMass. Does Providence need some more recognition? Jim, we talked about this in the USCHO Edge podcast, that somehow putting up great numbers, Providence still kind of lost games they should have won over the last couple of seasons. This was a great weekend for them.
Yeah, fantastic weekend. And tale of two games, too. As almost a strange opening on Friday night. They score a shorthanded goal, a power play goal, an even strength goal early in the game. Take a 3-0 lead that turns to 4-0 in the first minute of the second. And then, talking to Nate Lehman before Saturday's game, he said, you know what, after it got to 4-0, both teams just stopped playing defense and it turned into a strange game. They got a 5-1 and UMass crawled back to within a goal at 5-4. But Providence able to salt that one away on home ice. The next night, though, I thought was the more impressive victory. They scored first, then UMass got their mojo. They scored 3 times, and I think Providence through 2 periods only had maybe 11 or 12, maybe 13 shots. Then they outshoot UMass 22-3 in the 3rd period. They score twice, force overtime. And then UMass gets caught out on a long shift. Providence ends up turning the puck over and getting the breakaway that was the game winner for Berard. You take 5 out of 6 points against a UMass team that everybody felt was coming in, playing good hockey. Now UMass has lost 3 in a row after an OT loss last Saturday to Merrimack, and they're probably scratching their head saying, "What are we going to do? What needs to change?" But I was very impressed with Providence. They moved up on my ballot. I've got to look exactly where I put them. I had them moving from 14 to 10 on my ballot. They're right there. Definitely a top 10 team in my mind. They need to maybe put a couple more wins out there to get to a top 5 spot, but they should be right there in the national picture. And I guarantee as we do get to that January time, we start talking about the PairWise. If they continue to play the way that they are, they'll be right there. And you'll know pretty early that they're going to be a serious team for the NCAA tournament.
5 of 6 points in a weekend that you would say that it's destined for a split. Coaches all do it and they go through their calendar and say, we should get this, we should get that. And that's a split weekend for both teams where you go, okay. There's the joke when you talk to some coaches, when you play them, I have it with, when you go out East to say, hey, let's just take the 3 of 6 and we'll call it a day right now. And we won't even play the games. And everybody makes that joke, but usually the home team will go, hey, no, we want 4. But, to get 5 of 6, that's a big weekend for Providence.
Harvard continued to get a lot of high votes in the USCHO poll even before they played. They're the only undefeated team, 4-0. Currently, the final undefeated team beat Princeton and Yale this weekend. What do we know about Harvard this early on?
Well, I had high expectations for them coming in, just on their roster and the number of high-end draft picks they had. They have some real talent on that team. Now it's just putting it together and getting through. I don't know why the ECAC always strikes me as a league where teams don't always win the games they're supposed to. Getting into kind of what Derek was just saying, you can look at a lot of weekends where Harvard should be circling and saying this is a 6-point weekend. And next thing you know, you only got 3 or you only got 2. And you kind of sit there and shake your head. How did that happen? But at the same time, that just shows the slog of a college hockey season. And I think for some reason, in my mind, more than any league in the country, the ECAC oftentimes is that league where you'll have a great non-league record for an Ivy League school like a Harvard. And then in the league, they'll lose a strange game at Dartmouth, a strange game at Brown, puck bounce, a 2-1 loss at Yale, something like that. That just takes you down a little. But right now, Harvard, 2 weekends in, I believe it's an all Ivy schedule they've played to this point, so I think that's quite fair. But they're now 4-0, and we'll see if they can keep that truck rolling.
Yeah, and it's funny that you talk about them as the only undefeated team. A couple of years ago, we would still be saying Penn State's undefeated because that loss wouldn't have really counted. It would have been like the OT. It would have been a tie, basically, and then the bonus point would have went the other way. And what's it like? What's it? Only like 67% of a loss, but it was at home. So I'm not a math major. I'm not gonna.
No, don't try to do that math.
I'm not gonna even figure that one out. But hey, they win the games they got to win. And you can only play your own schedule. And, Doug Ross and rest his soul, the old Huntsville coach who passed away this last year. Unfortunately for the Ivy Leagues, Doug would always say, hey, 30, 34 games, because Huntsville sometimes couldn't get as many games as they wanted. They'd only play 30, 34 games. I get paid the same, so
27's okay in your mind.
Yeah, well, Doug would have said 27 or 34. I get paid the same. So we'll see how they continue to move forward as they progress in their season.
Some quick hits on some other big series over the weekend. We mentioned Merrimack sweeping Boston College. The Warriors are now 6-3-0.
And 4-1 in Hockey East. That's pretty impressive for a start. They, long ways to go, but I don't know that they had a good season last year. Kind of didn't close it in the playoffs. They got routed by UMass Lowell, which they had beat in the regular season. But I think that this is a Merrimack team that keeps taking steps forward. Where that goes, who knows? But it's better to start 4-1 than 1-4 and have to, dig yourself out of a hole. You can't take these points away. That's what I always say.
And they haven't had it easy. I mean, their assistant coach Josh Siako passing away unexpectedly during the season. I mean, that would take a toll on anybody. And they found a way to drown out the outside noise and get through a tragedy. So hats off to them in that start.
UMass Lowell had a weekend sweep of Vermont, shutting them out both games 4-0 and 2-0.
And goaltender U keeps going. They're just churning out these goaltenders. Every year you sit there and say, oh, what's the biggest question mark about UMass Lowell? And you're like, oh, goaltending. They have no experience in that. You returned Henry Welsh, who didn't play much last season, but 2 seasons ago got them to the Hockey East finals. And then you bring this transfer in from Alaska, Griggles, and he's solid. Welsh goes in this weekend, doesn't give up a goal. When you always can rely on goaltending, even when that's supposed to be your biggest question mark, it's going to be a good season. I think 7-3 is a good start for them. I think they'd like a couple of their losses back, but still 7-3 is a solid start.
Yeah, they just keep, they just keep finding ways to get it done with different teams. And we used the R word before. They never have to reload. They never get the publicity that everybody else gets, but they never have to rebuild. And that's the mark of a good program. They're always consistently there. And whether it's with goaltending, whether it's without goaltending, they find ways to get it done.
We touched a little bit on Atlantic hockey. RIT swept AIC on the road. The Tigers are now 8-2. Just throw in one notable thing. Saturday's win for Wayne Wilson was his 300th win at the Division I level to go along with the ones that he had at D3. But we're kind of wondering, is this a changing of the guard? But a couple of things I want to throw in there. First, it was AIC, Sacred Heart, Air Force, and RIT picked as the top 4 by the coaches. So you expected some of these teams to be in the mix. And it's not like AIC has been spotless against RIT over the past few years. Derek, you'll remember semifinal loss for Robert Morris to AIC in the year that they went to the NCAAs the first time. RIT lost in the other semifinal in overtime, 1-0 to Niagara. But during that season, RIT won all 4 games against AIC. They didn't play in the COVID season. Last season, there were 2 losses for RIT, an overtime win and a shootout win at home. So they picked up 4 out of 12. So it's not like AIC has been dominating other top teams, even though they've kind of run away with it. But I think among all of those, the team that we should be looking at that is rising to the top is Niagara. They caught some attention when they went on the road and swept Omaha. They really just pounded Bentley on Friday, scoring a power play goal in the first minute because of a protocol violation by Bentley before the game, and then one on Saturday as well. So maybe not a changing of the guard, but maybe a couple other teams sneaking into the mix.
Yeah, that's the ones we brought up. And you got Sacred Heart, you got Niagara. Air Force hasn't played that many games. I know Mercyhurst just played their first couple conference games, and they're done non-conference. So you're going to start seeing it all kind of work out, from top to bottom. But those are teams that have done a good job. I mean, you've got Niagara with a really good goaltender in Chad Veltri, who's won a lot of games, knocked us out of the playoffs. And you got Sacred Heart that during that COVID, when we got canceled, was on the cusp of one of their best seasons ever. Will they be able to sustain it? That's the question. Will Niagara be able to sustain it? That's the question. But all right, they've put you always, when you have a lot of non-conference games early, you say you want to put a number out there and make everybody catch you. You know, you'd rather be chased than have to be the chaser. So yeah, and thanks for bringing up that overtime loss against AIC, Ed. You know, I appreciate why my goalie plays for Michigan. You bring up a painful loss. We tied that game in the last minute, gave it up on a wraparound in overtime. So hey, thanks for ruining my Monday, Dad. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I had a bad memory from the other semifinal, so there you go. But it's good to see not only some competitiveness in that league, but also seeing the out-of-conference numbers get up there. We've talked for years about that league knocking on the door. They seem right now perhaps to have made a little bit of movement in that direction with what you're seeing from some of the teams. It's been enough time now with a full complement of 18 scholarships across the league to really start stocking some more players in there. I know I'll get accused of being a little bit of a cheerleader for the league, but we want to see it move up and be better. And as I said in TMQ with Paula last week, the league is kind of nipping on the heels right now of ECAC and CCHA at that level.
Yeah, you know, and teams are going to make steps. You know, a coaching in the league continues to improve. You know, you mentioned Niagara and Jason Lammers. I've known him for a long time, and Bill Riga coming over from Quinnipiac. I know he's got some growing pains and building pains at Holy Cross, but I guarantee that they're going to have some big wins over the next couple of seasons. These are guys that have proven winners everywhere they've been, despite the fact that they've been assistant coaches. They've been part of staffs that have won. Lammers did a great job at UMass Lowell, getting them to their first couple Hockey East championships. So I think that some of these coaching personalities, even Eric Lang, you know, what he's been able to do to reinvigorate this AIC team, that's a big story. You know, that's usually what leagues need to improve is usually, you know, some really good young coaches. And I think you're seeing that in spades and not just in Atlantic hockey, you're seeing it across a lot of college hockey. But when I look at some of these programs that are standing out to me, AIC, Niagara, Holy Cross, they're going to make some big strides over the next few years.
I'm glad you brought up Holy Cross. Bill Riga's Crusaders got 5 out of 6 points at Canisius this weekend. They picked up a point last weekend at RIT. So 2 very long road trips in successive weekends. They get 6 out of 12 points. That's pretty good on the road. I
meant to give a shout out. Cornell coach Mike Schafer. Friday nights gets the win, his 500th career win as a head coach. And we all know he had some health troubles, a health scare down the stretch of last season. It's good to see him back behind the bench. And, you know, hats off to Schafer, one of the good guys in college hockey, and 500 wins. That is no small accomplishment.
And you know what I do? I want to echo that. I worked for Mike for a year and I played for Mike for 4 years. He's been there every day for Cornell. Obviously, his 5 years at Western Michigan were a very good time for the Broncos. We went to an NCAA tournament during his time. He recruited a team that went to another one, but he's a Cornell man through and through. And for him to be able to get 500 wins, I'm happy to say that I was part of probably about 15 of them. So he's done pretty well without anybody else around it. He just keeps churning, whether it's new assistants that he promotes and moves on from Casey Jones, Jamie Russell, Brent Brecky, myself, all Division I head coaches. And I'm sure I'm probably forgetting somebody, but he just keeps churning out wins and coaches. And Ben Sire probably will be the next one to get a sniff at a head coaching job.
Well, with that, we'll wrap it up. USCHO Weekend Review is sponsored by DCU Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org and find our podcast at uscho.com/podcast or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. For Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Weekend Review.